Hello, everybody. This is Nick DeTiro, Professor of Information Technologies and Computer Science, Lakeland Community College. Let's talk about session hijacking. Fundamentally, session hijacking is when the attacker can get in between the client and a server or establish a connection with the client's credentials with the server after the client has gone away. In this video, we're going to be examining a man-in-the-middle attack using ARP poisoning. A man-in-the-middle attack is a form of session hijacking because the attacker is going to be in between the client and the server, and both the client and the server aren't going to be immediately aware of it. So we're going to do this using what we call ARP poisoning. If you're interested in ARP and other things, you can watch other videos. But let's take a look and let's go up to my screen and let's break down what we're going to do. All right, so this is my network, and in my network, we have a whole bunch of computers. We're only going to be concerned with 3 in this video. We're going to have Alice, who's going to be the client. We're going to have a web server, and this particular web server, just what we call OWASP, stands for Open World Wide Web Application Security Project. It's a well-known project in which is very similar to Metasploitable, where they give you a web server that's very vulnerable. I don't care about that. This is not a let's attack the web server. This is a man-in-the-middle attack. But the reason I'm using this server is because this particular server only uses HTTP, and that's going to be important for our discussions here. So we have the client, Alice, and we have the web server, OWASP. And then we're going to have the attacker, Godzilla. And Godzilla is going to be the man in the middle. It's going to get in between Alice and the web server. Now, it doesn't physically get in between, etc. Now, this type of attack is a sniffer-based attack. Now, if you watched any videos about sniffers, we talked about that you need a hub. That's when you're doing passive sniffing. This is going to be a very active sniffing approach. So one of the things that we can do to prevent these type of attacks is that our networks can be very secure and have our intrusion detection systems or intrusion protection systems be aware of suspicious traffic. If they see that traffic is supposed to be going between 2 different computers, but it's actually now being routed between another one, that's a sign of a man-in-the-middle attack. We will also discuss some of the things that we have to make aware of with a man-in-the-middle attack. It's not that hard of an attack to do. It's at the level of a script kiddie if it's done cleanly and correctly. So let's go up to my network. So what are we going to do? Well, first of all, when Alice makes that initial connection using a web browser, Alice is going to connect to a web server. She is going to do an ARP because she has never communicated with that server before. She has to go out and say, who is? She's going to do an ARP broadcast. Again, there's videos if you want to watch about how ARP works, but she's going to do a ARP broadcast. If you're familiar from Networking Plus course or another discussions, how ARP works is because it uses broadcasting, the first time that a client goes looking for something, it has to say who is. It does this broadcast. It says who is. Now in this situation, she's going to be looking for 10.0.1.5. She's going to go out there and say who is 10.0.1.5. Now all the clients on that particular segment, because broadcasting doesn't show up over routers, are going to reach out and say, oh, the one client that is, it's me. The other ones are going to ignore it, but they all have to hear it. Once that happens, to reduce the amount of broadcasting down the road, is Alice is going to put in her ARP cache, in her memory, the resolution. So Alice will say 10.0.1.5 is this MAC address, and vice versa. Whoever responded is going to keep track of who made that initial request. So over here on this web server is going to say, oh, 10.0.1.3 wanted my MAC address. I need their MAC address. So inside the web server's ARP cache, we have this stuff here. Nothing's going to happen to Godzilla. After the initial ARP, Godzilla is clueless about the communication. Now, some people might begin to ask, well, the web server is on this segment. What about when the web server is on a different segment? It still goes through the same situation, but Alice would not be really concerned about the actual web server's MAC address. Alice would be concerned about the router's MAC address, because that's who she is talking to when she talks to the web server. So we could potentially poison the router, so any traffic coming from that web server would be redirected. But to keep this video simple, I put the web server on the same segment. But the same overall principle would work, except that the machine on the internet, we would not need to know its MAC address. We would just need to know the router's MAC address. And what will eventually happen is this. When Godzilla poisons the ARP cache, we would look inside the ARP cache of both the client and the server, and what we would see is on the client side, it would show something like this, 10.0.1.5. Its MAC address is now Godzilla's MAC address, and vice versa. If we go to the web server, and we will, and we look at its ARP cache, it would say 10.0.1.3, which is Alice's IP address. That is also going to Godzilla. So Godzilla has basically fooled them into sending traffic, because Alice thinks that 10.0.1.5, its MAC address is really Godzilla, and the same thing with the web server. This will make more sense. I know it gets confusing, especially with the numbers. This is going to make more sense once we actually start doing the poisoning. So let's actually do the poisoning. All right, so I have 3 computers here. Let me log into Alice real quick. I have 3 computers here. I have the client, which is Alice, represented by Alice in Wonderland. Down here in the lower right-hand corner, that's the web server. Now, normally we wouldn't care about the web server, but I just want to look at its ARP cache when things go on. And over here is Godzilla. Now, what I'm going to do with Godzilla is I am going to put and turn on Wireshark so I can see the network traffic as the communication is occurring. So I'm going to go to Godzilla, Sniffer, Wireshark. And again, Godzilla will pick up the initial ARP traffic, right? Godzilla's going to pick up the initial ARP traffic, but after the client and the server establish who they are, it's not going to see that traffic. So there it's gathering information. Now, before we go any further, let's take a look at all the ARP cache on all 3 machines. So first on Godzilla, if I just make it a little bit bigger and I just say ARP-V, it has nothing in its cache. If I go to Alice and I say ARP-V, she has the router in her ARP cache. So at some point when Alice booted up, she probably made connection to the router. Not a big deal. And if I go to the web server, it didn't have anything in its ARP cache. So when it booted up, it didn't make any communication, any effort with the router. All right. Now, all I'm going to do, you notice if I go back to Wireshark, where are you, Wireshark? No traffic has occurred because I haven't done anything, and it's a very restricted network. Right? So now what I'm going to do is I am going to just do basic web surfing. So I'm going to go to Alice, and I'm going to initiate a web browser. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause my machine because it takes a little bit of time for the web browser to come up. All right, so now the web browser has come up, and again, I'm going to pause the machine when there's just certain delays. You will notice that there was an ARP broadcast over here at Godzilla because when she came up, she was looking for 10.0.1.5. Let's go to 10.0.1.5. I'm going to say HTTP. Now, before we go any further, again, the only reason I'm using this particular web server is because I'm using HTTP. Give it a second. You notice that over here on Godzilla, no traffic is occurring between Alice and Godzilla. All the traffic is occurring between Alice and the web server. If I was to go to the web server now and I was to do an ARP V, you can see that, don't worry about the traffic going over here, but you can see at the web server, it now has information in its ARP cache. It has basically the return path back to Alice. Alice is 10.0.1.3, so it has the return path. Now, if you want to get a little piece of paper and mark this down, there is the hardware address. It ends with 7B. So Alice's hardware address ends with 7B. If I go to, I'm going to open up Alice just a little bit, and I'm going to go to her ARP cache just to see. Stretch it out so it's all on one line. And we can see that she now, in her ARP cache, she now has the hardware address for the web server. All right, just out of curiosity, what is the, I have things all over, hold on one second. So, what is the ARP cache over at Godzilla? Has there been any resolution for Godzilla? So I'm going to open up here, and I'm just going to say ARP-V. Godzilla has not participated in anything. It's just kind of sitting there, and if there's an ARP resolution, then it'll ignore it. But you can see by this, Godzilla has not participated in any of the communication. Now, the network monitor, Wireshark, it's just picking up the ARP traffic. It hasn't picked up any HTTP traffic or anything like that. Now it's time to poison the ARP tables or ARP cache. So over here at Godzilla, basically I'm going to put Godzilla between. I'm going to go to sniffing, and I'm going to go to EtherCap. And EtherCap does require elevated privileges. Give it a second. And let's open up EtherCap a little bit. Bring it up here. All right, so it fired up, nothing impressive yet. Now what I'm going to do, here's where EtherCap relies upon active sniffing. It needs to go out and discover hosts. It's not listening. Godzilla is not in promiscuous mode. Godzilla is not in monitor mode, nothing like that. So no traffic is going to Godzilla, and that's important. So what we have to do is we have to tell EtherCap to go out and find potential targets. There's the active portion of the sniffing. So I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to say host, scan for hosts. Now, if we were to see the Wireshark, we'll see just a whole bunch of traffic, and we will in a second. You see that it discovered three hosts, but let's go to Wireshark. It is doing ARPing across the board, right? So EtherCap is using a very passive, not too passive, but it's using a broadcast approach to discover things. So it's not pinging. It's not pinging any addresses. It's ARPing everybody. There's where your intrusion detection or intrusion protection systems will come into play. If they see a system ARPing away, that should be an indication that something doesn't make sense, right? I'm not saying it's an attack, but typically a computer does not do that many ARPs. Go back to EtherCap. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, show me the host. List the hosts. And there are the hosts. We have 10.0.1.1, that's the router. 10.0.1.3, that is that's Alice. It's also showing Alice's, looks like it's IP6 there. And we have the 10.0.1.5, that is the web server. Now, again, we suspend reality a little bit. We may be doing some homework here, but I know what those machines are. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to poison their ARP. I'm going to say take Alice and make her target 1. And if you see down here, she's now target 1. I'm going to take the web server and make it target 2. Right? So down here, it's showing that host 10.0.1.3 is target 1 and host 10.0.1.5 is target 2. Let's poison. Let's do a man-in-the-middle attack using ARP poisoning. So I'm going to go up to the man-in-the-middle button, and I say, do an ARP poison. Yep. Right. Let's take a look at Alice and the web server. Now, here is the old information for Alice and the web server. The IP address Alice has for the web server ends with 8F. The MAC address that Alice has for the router ends with EF. Let's see what it says now. This is interesting. The MAC address for 10.0.1.5 ends with 9F, and the MAC address for the Godzilla 10.0.1.2 is also 9F. So in Alice's ARP cache, she's seeing 2 separate IP addresses with the same MAC address. Let's take a look at the web server. And we're seeing that 10.0.1.3 has the MAC address also of Godzilla. So we have successfully inserted Godzilla between Alice and the web server. Now let's see what happens when Alice just does simple web serving. Okay, let's go to that web server. Give it a second. Now, a couple things. I'm gonna expand Alice a little bit here. Couple of things. I'm using that web server just to use as a web server. We're not hacking the web server. We're being a man in the middle. We're hacking between the two. Couple things to pay attention. The reason I chose that server, because it uses HTTP, not HTTPS. You will notice right there, it is telling me this is an unencrypted, non-secure communication between Alice and the web server. That has nothing to do with the man-in-the-middle attack. Let me repeat that. Has nothing to do with the man-in-the-middle attack. It has everything to do that we are using HTTP. If you use any web browser, you'll see that. If you look at your web browser and if you see a lock and it's locked, that's saying HTTPS. You look at a web browser and the lock is open, HTTP. So let's log in. Okay. I'll say root. I'm not going to show you the secret password. I'm not going to save the secret password. And lo and behold, I have logged into that web server. Now, let me shrink Alice back up. Oh, I keep doing that. I apologize. And if we go over here and we are looking back at Godzilla, look what EtherCap showed us. This is EtherCap, the program EtherCap is not. It is showing us that it captured information. And what it captured, besides a bunch of JPEGs, it's showing me, because I'm using HTTP, in clear text, it captured the username root and the user password OWASPBWA. That's the password that you didn't see, but because that password was sent using HTTP, it's in clear text. It's not encrypted. Now, let us go down, and here is, I'm going to open up Godzilla here, so a little bit easier to read. And let's take a look at all the Wireshark information. First of all, here's all those ARPings, right? And if we scroll back up, excuse that. Here's all this transmission. Let's take a look at, first of all the ARP traffic that it captured. Here was that initial, well, here were those first couple initial ARP information. But then when I did the scan for host, it just ARPed away. It scanned for everything and it said, okay, tell me. Well, nobody replied, so it didn't gather any of that information. Now let's go to HTTP traffic. And here's our given HTTP traffic on the server. So I chose that web server so I can see just simple clear text. You saw that EtherCap gathered that particular information. And if I was to go through this, I would find pieces, parts of information. It's interesting that it's not showing certain information, but let's see. Let's just go to, right? What's it getting? Oh, just different HTTP traffic. And if I was to scan through there, I would find the password in clear text. But since EtherCap gave it to me, I'm in good shape. So what happened? Well, I manned in the middle. I basically put Godzilla between the two. Now, let me shrink this up a little bit. Sorry for all the confusion. And let me go back to EtherCap. And what I'm going to do with EtherCap now is I'm going to unpoison the tables. So let me go to Alice and let's see. Let's see what's in her ARP table. Okay, expand this out a little bit. And let's go to the web server, do the exact same thing. And you can see that they're still poisoned, the 9F. So 10.5 is going to 9F, that's right there. And 10.2 is 9F. So it's still being poisoned. And same thing down here. 10.0.1.3 is 9F. So let's unpoison those tables. So I'm back at EtherCap, and I'm going to say stop the man in the middle attack. So right now, it's stopping the man in the middle attack. And if you look down here, I wish I can show you the screen a little bit better. It says that our poisoning or our poisoner has been deactivated. Let's go back to Alice and let's see what Alice has to say in her ARP cache. It's back to normal. So it went out there, EtherCap kept all that information, went back out there, and it put this stuff in there. And it do the same thing on the web server. Right? So we're back to normal. Now, with session hijacking, if I turn these machines off, the ARP cache goes away, right? So session hijacking is a active event. It is while the machines are still running. It has, they deal with how things are linked and stuff like that. Let me go up to my screen and wrap things up here. All right. So this is a fairly easy attack to do. You can do it on wireless too if you have the right equipment, which is basically a network card that can, potentially listen to traffic and scan and stuff like that. But what's more important in a Wi-Fi environment, it would have to be an open network. Right. So if you went to a restaurant and you saw, here's our here's our Wi-Fi and here's our password, those are very susceptible to man-in-the-middle attacks because you're already giving that information. When it's a more secure Wi-Fi network, it's a lot trickier. But this is a fairly simple attack, a fairly simple session attack, a session hijacking attack that it's at the script kiddie level, but it's very efficient. So what can we do? What can we advise as ethical hackers? What can we advise as network administrators? First of all, on your network, you have to make sure that your IDS and IPS systems are looking for excess ARP traffic. ARP is a necessary evil, but if there is a device going out there ARPing away and looking for all the, that's usually an indication that something interesting is going on. So that's one thing. But there's no way, I shouldn't say that. It's very difficult for the end user to be aware of a man-in-the-middle attack. There's just not a lot going on that the end user doesn't know about ARP cache. Most people don't know about ARP cache, let alone looking up ARP cache. So it's very transparent. So we have to educate our users. We have to educate people that if you're on a public network, don't do anything private. You hear that all the time. If you go to XYZ restaurant, don't do anything private because it can be intercepted. The other thing is across the board, excuse me, HTTP, wonderful protocol. It's what the World Wide Web is based on. But if you're doing something sensitive, if you're sending credit card information, regardless of the network, HTTP sends it as clear text. So we have to educate our users to look at the browser. And if that browser has that lock in it and it's locked, you're safe. It's HTTPS or safer. But if that browser has that lock open, that means you're using HTTP. So recap, network administrators, you have to have your IDSs and your IPSs be aware of unnecessary or a lot of ARP traffic. Also, you have to make sure that your IDS and IPS are aware. Why is the traffic going between two different devices? Why is it going through an intermediary device? So that's easy to track. Beyond that, you got to educate your users that in an open network, it's easy to do a man-in-the-middle attack. HTTP, clear text. So a lot of little things. I hope you enjoyed the video. And with that being said, let's go learn something.